So thank you, Rupert, and the Sukeltajaliitto Scientific Committee for allowing me to speak about a sadly underrepresented aspect of Finnish maritime archaeology, namely its lakes. Just checking, can you hear me? I can't hear anything back.
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Okay, great. So basically, this is using a low-key citizen science approach that invites more amateur archaeologists and divers to join in the projects. I'd like to also point out that I've concentrated on this presentation about lakes. I did talk previously about rivers, but I think I see that Sala Maria is going to talk about rivers later. So I'd like to concentrate about a project that I did several years ago. I also would like to commend Elena on a fantastic role model of how to conduct lake and river studies in a country. My talk, in contrast, is going to be completely different. This is more like a startup kind of citizen science project, much lower tech and involving amateur divers, guided, of course, by scientists. So Finland has been called the land of 1,000 lakes, and I think it's definitely part of the national character. You can see on the diagram on the right, the waters provide pretty much the lifeblood and the nervous system for the country. And we have something in the order of 187,000 lakes, and something like 20% of the land in the lakes is water. And so lakes and rivers have definitely dynamically shaped Finland. I'm not going to go into the geology. I think someone else might cover that. But it's safe to say that no two lakes or rivers are the same. The dimensions are different, their depths are different, their flow dynamics are different, their geology is very different. And the lakes themselves have shaped human development. So sometimes they've been seen as barriers, both physical and territorial, which have helped shape cultural civilization, but also they've functioned as enablers, highways of travel, trade, the mixing of cultures. And of course, in winter, they then become highways, much easier to get across than perhaps forest roads. And humans in turn have shaped the lakes to a lesser extent. So industrial, commercial development, canals, drainage for farmland, peat production has been a big thing. The building of bridges has divided up areas. As far as archaeological studies in Finnish lakes, the research began much later in the mid-1980s, largely in the Saimaa region, and a lot later than studies of maritime archaeology in marine areas. There's been some Stone Age rock carvings made of boats. That's from the Etelä-Savo region. Perhaps their artistic expression, I've just seen this strange object on the water, I'm going to carve to see what it looks like. Or perhaps they were used as journey markers. But we have no Iron Age clinker boats. I think it's quite likely that Vikings from the west visited Finland, or perhaps it was even locals using the same technology, but we have no actual finds to show for it, which is quite staggering. We have no surviving skin boats, preservation conditions have stopped that, and only 3 log boats. And surprisingly, these are from quite late in Finland's history. We also have 7 sewn plank boats where the planks are sewn together. Hello? Sewn plank boats. I can't hear you, sorry. Okay, I'll carry on. So we have 7 of these sewn plank boats in Saimaa from the 1100s to the 1600s, still quite late. And these are planks that are sewn together with fibers, and then they put caulking like wool and other products between the planks to make sure that they actually keep the water out. And then we have a proliferation of boats from the 1800s onwards, very much with the logging industry, the tar making industry, which focused pretty much on in Oulu in the north. And then from the 1900s, we have more leisure boats and ferries. I wanted to focus more on Pirkanmaa's maritime archaeology heritage because I was actually at the Pirkanmaa Maakunta Museum doing a internship, and I was surprised to find, first of all, that Pirkanmaa's water area is like 14%, and it's definitely seems to be part of Pirkanmaa identity. I live by a lake, so it's very much part of my own identity, living in Finland as my home now. And when I looked at the database for the national, for Cleasby2, I found there was something over 4,000 sites of archaeological cultural heritage in the Pirkanmaa region, which they call Kintiamuinesianos, which are heritage objects over 100 years. But only 6 of them are shipwrecks. And 4 of them, the 6 are in Näsijärvi, which is actually undergoing quite a lot of commercial activity. So that's not surprising. 9 other shipwrecks are possible relics, not really identified as being old or culturally important. And there are 12 other underwater objects, such as jetties, undescribed objects that are older. So why are so few sites being discovered underwater in Pirkanmaa and perhaps in Finland generally? Well, it turns out that these underwater inventories that are carried out only really seem to happen when commercial development funds the archaeology. So the picture on the right there is what the situation is now, where once the Näsijärvi tugboat, which is an 1870s tugboat, sat on the bottom. That was raised because money was provided by the council, and it's been relocated to another area. This is this area of construction is now the tram line that connects Tampere city centre to Lielahti, still not finished. And of course, then there was the Mustalahti waterfront, which provided several wrecks. But as Elena said earlier, a lot of the new finds come from local knowledge, from divers finding them haphazardly, and also from anchor and net snagging from local boats. But my feeling is that the situation is reactive, not proactive. So it's more rescue, not research. And if, for instance, several projects appeared nationally in different areas, and the museum said, local museum said, we need someone to investigate this, then I think the Museorasto diving team, which is relatively small, would be hard pressed to actually get to those projects within a relatively short period of time. And the commercial diving archaeology companies like the Nordic Maritime Group and also Subrearing only gets onto the sites if they're referred to and if they get paid. And as Elena also mentioned, scuba clubs have often found lake sites underwater. But in my experience, most of the finds have been haphazardly found, and scuba clubs use the lakes for training in winter to check their equipment it works correctly. And they're not actually out there proactively searching for new sites. So this is a map of Pyhäjärvi. At the top there, that's my house in the star. I live near the lake. And the site I'm going to concentrate on is Tursinnotka, which is the other star shown on the map. The red dots are actually sites of cultural significance. And this is from 2020. I'm sure there are more now, but only 3 of them were found underwater. 17 of them touch shore, and I include them as maritime archaeology because they're actually related to maritime activities conducted near the water. And there are 16 land sites which are less than 5 meters from the shore, which perhaps are related to maritime activity. But where are the others? I'm sure there's many more to find, a massive amount of potential to realize. So this is the site of Tursinnotka. The red area is the culturally protected zone. You can see the lake on the right there, close to the land. On the bottom left there, there's a round circle, black circle on the top right. That's where these archaeologists have been working down on the bottom right. There's a project that's been going on there for many years. It's finished now, and looking at this Iron Age village that was discovered. Members of Helsinki University have worked there. So I had the privilege, because I was on an internship, to go down and work with them for the day. But then I thought, what's the relationship of the land to the water? It's so close, but no one's really, when I asked them, had any idea if there was anything found nearby in the lake. So I thought perhaps it was important to actually produce a maritime archaeological perspective to complement the land perspective, to see the land from the water rather than the other way around, using this idea that lake is a cultural enabler, not a barrier. It's good for trade. It's an icy highway in winter, and also it's not just a resource for fish, but for eating. And also there's a concept of maritime archaeology put out by Krista Westerdahl, that the water should be seen part of a seamless maritime and terrestrial cultural landscape that unites the land, the foreshore, and the water as part of one landscape, not separated. Also, when I looked through the previous site reports, there was no actual evidence of boats, net weights, fish traps, jetties, only a harpoon tip and many fish bones. So very indirect evidence for what may have actually been going on at the site. And I think you need to actually have a perspective for the water to give a much more balanced picture of Iron Age life. I also wanted to, because I work a lot at sea, in maritime conditions, you know, with wrecks at sea, I wanted to develop my own experience and methods for doing underwater surveys in Finnish lake conditions. And part of the challenge is also just finding like-minded people to actually do the study. So I had 5 or 6 people who came and said, yes, I'd love to get in the water. I think they would perhaps regretted it later on when they saw what the conditions were like at times. Here we have on the bottom left, this is the foreshore at Tursinotko, these beautiful reed beds, which I loved when I saw them, but when I had to work within them, weren't quite my favorite. Here's the site again. So on the top right there, that's me in my dry suit, sweating profusely while people up above are working relatively dry. On the bottom left is the number 1 that's indicated on the map above. So there, that's number 1. This is kind of like it's actually what gives Tursinotko its name. It's the cod. It's a narrow kind of culvert that runs up alongside. And that's dark, dense, unpleasant, stagnant water. Bottom right there is number 2. That was my actual access point into the water, and I think boats are being used to being put into the water there. Then number 3, here, further down, this is actually the outlet of a river or a stream now that runs from the airport of Pirkkala, 20 miles away or so, that runs out into the lake. It's now very stone-lined to stop it silting up. It's very difficult. I've walked along there. It's very difficult to actually find any original sediment because it's buried under a lot of material. And this is the bridge on the bottom right there that spans across the stream. Now, this is probably the most important and least obvious thing for you to understand. This is the area on the other side of the bridge with the stream that goes up towards the airport. This I'm going to come back to because this became the focus of my study in the end. So difficulties finding archaeological remains in sites. Well, the ideal is absolute great visibility, very low levels of silt. This one was actually taken under the ice, which is great if you can get in there under the ice and actually start surveying. You get these conditions also in deeper water and also away from overhanging trees, because as I was about to learn, leaves can be also a problem. The reality is the conditions often suffer from poor visibility, poor light, lots of silt. There's thick layers of decay sometimes, especially in ponds rather than the deeper lakes. And sometimes you're just looking for the archaeology by hand, which in theory can damage any archaeology. And if you use a metal detector and you get a ping, it's very often true that you can't actually then find what the object is under the silt, because the silt can be longer than my arm's length. So perhaps in the future, I would need more high-tech methods to get involved in doing this kind of study. But that involves more expense, the kind of expense that Elena was very, very lucky to actually be able to employ. And then away from the deeper water and the clear conditions, it becomes much tougher near the foreshore. So I mentioned these reed beds. They're solid enough to walk on, but impenetrable to try and work within. These beautiful lily beds, absolutely fantastic, beautiful, unfortunately a nightmare to dive through. And then you get this stagnant water, which is unpleasant, certainly to the nose, and also corrosive to your dive kit. I set up 3 different study phases. One was basically field walking, just to orientate to the area, to see how the land and the water connected. It's low tech, it's easy. It gave me a good understanding of the environment, and it allowed me some initial speculation how past peoples might have used the site. I also quickly discovered the limitations. The land foliage is too thick to give me any clues as to what features might be. The reed beds were thick, the dark water was unpleasant, and perhaps even a disease risk. And you should have seen the look on my wife's face when I came home with my kit disgustingly covered in grime and dirt. And it took a while for her to let me in the house. And in fact, she even went looking for a hose to hose me down outside. Snorkeling is definitely a good option to start with. In the shallow water, covers a lot of area. It's very low tech. You can use flags and floats to mark finds that you find underwater. Then you GPS them in later. But it's ineffective if you want to stay and work in one place, trying to hover there. And it's impossible if the finds are just at your arm's length or deeper. So then you move on to diving as a solution. But you need to be very careful with your weighting. If you're just too low, you'll touch the bottom, you'll disturb the silt. And if you're near the surface, water surface tension brings you back up. This gives you an idea of the conditions there. So lots of silt in the water, difficult to see. You get down lower. These are the reed beds, very thick, very difficult to penetrate. Then we started to see these finds. These are planks. Unfortunately, I think they came from the modern barn, and some of the metal there is the fixings are definitely much more modern. Then in the lily beds in the height of summer, very difficult to see what's actually near to the foreshore. Extremely difficult. Then this is from another site, not at Tursanokko, that Emma was actually at. Is with you today, and this is a pond, a lampi. The amount of sedimentation was even greater, providing much more difficulty underwater. So we have a lot of silt, and then we have these thick leaves congregated in the water. Any finds with the metal detector we were looking for, well underneath that, and also under a huge level of decay and detritus, because these lakes are very, very anoxic. It was a fun day out, to say the least. Visibility, very dark. We tried to do a circular search, and we got separated from each other too easily. And then this here is just a still of actually some of the thick clay anoxic material you get, which can be meters thick. So we were diving on the site. We found this. We also looked at the foreshore features. On the top left there is what looks like someone's made with stones, a kind of a hard area. But it looked like there was no way of identifying if it was old or new. And then we found boats. Wow, I'm a maritime archaeologist after all. Unfortunately, my friend Ari, he is a boat builder. He decided that the technique for making this laminate boat was actually reasonably modern, 1900s plus. And if you look at the picture down below, this white substance there, this white substance is silica glue, which is actually modern. We also looked at a lot of the logs that were there to see if they've been dressed, but as you know, logs can actually float in from elsewhere. You still see that? It's changed screen for me. Okay, so what we have here is I tried to actually get some definite underwater surveying going. So I put my phone, I took a risk with my mobile phone, put it into a waterproof bag. I synchronized my dive computer to the actual phone. I started Mastercarter, which is a tracking program, and then went on to water diving. So when I found an object that was actually reasonably interesting, I would actually describe it, write it down. I would video what was on my dive computer for the time and video the object. And then presumably I could find it later on. So top left there, these are the timings at which I actually found the objects underwater. The ideal was to do the grid search in straight lines. Unfortunately, the result down the right was a little more wonky, but not bad considering. There are actually different systems like UVs that can be used to give a much more straight line grid search for the future. This is overall as the map I came up with, the objects I'd found there. Unfortunately, all of them modern finds. Perhaps the mound that's shown in the middle wasn't. I'd like to point out it's actually quite useful, low tech, to actually use to position your finds using a combination of transit lines to land features, compass bearings, and GPS to get better accuracy to find your objects later. But unfortunately, modern finds. Was it a dead end? Was it a waste of time? I was a bit disheartened until I got back and then started realizing I'd missed one important component. I hadn't considered past lake level changes to reconstruct the past environment. So around about 7,000 BC, Pyhäjärvi was something like 80 meters above sea level. And then in 5,500, the Näsijärvi burst its banks, poured water down through what are now the Tammerkoski Rapids, which poured into Pyhäjärvi and raised the actual water level 2 or 3 meters. Gradually, that level dropped over time during the Stone Age to about 80, and then there was a gradual rise in Finnish lakes generally, in the Iron Age from 400 to 1200, and then a gradual drop again. But all the indications were that at Iron Age Tursinotko, the water level was probably 80 or 81 meters above sea level. And now it's 77. So in fact, the water level would have been something like 4 meters higher. There was also a change later when the Nokia Rapids burst in the 18th century. So I redrew the map with basically using paint, low tech again. The blue line there is the 79-meter contour, which I think was the lowest it would have been. And lo and behold, you've got this inland water area, a lagoon, which totally changes the topography of the site. And perhaps if that was the condition that was happening in the Iron Age, the way the actual whole village would have actually worked, how they would have seen themselves, and how they would develop. Then if you think the water level was at 80 meters, you've got an even larger lagoon. And this area, in fact, now the village, which is up here, the village is now bounded on 3 sides by water and then forest behind. And it's actually cut off from this ridge opposite. A bit embarrassing. I then also found that someone had also got there before me. They'd actually found this information out before. It also reassured me because I knew I was slightly on the right track for my research. And just to bring the topic up to date, the water level then lowered in medieval times and this lagoon disappeared in this area. And a medieval village spread to both sides of the river. There was a bridge built, and later on this whole area turned into fields, which is that area I showed earlier. And the river then became just a stream. So this is the area I pointed out earlier, this overlooked area below the 80-meter contour. No field work had been done on it, no survey with ground penetrating radar, no excavation, text pitting, drone aerial photography, no metal detecting. So this was virgin area. And I think it changes the whole interpretation of the site as you would see it. The area I've highlighted in black there is where perhaps boats might have actually been berthed next to the village. So, I would be thinking to look there. And this lagoon produces an internal harbor in a way where boats could actually come into it, be protected from the wind and not be visible from the open lake. So that the boats, if they were in this lagoon, would be safer from raiders because the raiders could not see the boats from the main lake position. And the village would also be better defended as it has water on all sides. And perhaps even fishing would be easier. In this shallow lagoon, you could even close off the entranceway with a temporary fish trap and then have a seasonal harvest. Measuring between the contours, this space is in the entrance between 10 and 15 meters wide, which is where the bridge is now, but in fact it was much larger than where that bridge is. So I think, it's quite possible that large vessels could have gone through it. I mean, even the large seagoing vessels like the Bogstad boat only has a 1.4 meter draft. And then this Sotka boat, this is a replica made of the Lapri boat, which is a 13th century clinker boat, could easily have passed through there. So what would be my next step there? I'd start to look for features that would normally be found underwater, under the land. And to my mind, that's still maritime archaeology because it is water related. It's vessels, looking at the boats. I have perhaps more knowledge than some of the land archaeologists about how to actually specify what type of boat, what its construction method would be. You have to go through the normal processes of writing a research plan. I'd have to liaise with Pirkanmaa Kunta Museum for advice and permissions. There's fundraising for equipment hire. All the essential expenses need to be paid. And also then the process inviting volunteers with some experience in drone survey, metal detecting. A local metal detecting society at the time I did the project were very interested in volunteering their time. Amateur archaeologists on their day off, or even some professionals who have spare time. All would be welcome. I think specifically I'd have to core under the bridge area in that channel using an auger to see if the channel was wide enough, if it was deep enough in the Iron Age, and to look for sediments characteristic of lakes in the channel and lagoon, because presumably the lake water would push in and you'd have much more lake sediment than river sediment coming in. And to differentiate between different types of diatoms, these algae and microorganisms that live in lake water from those that live in rivers. And I believe also it's quite possible to actually use radiocarbon dating to look at these diatom-rich sediments, which would be very useful. Although I'm not sure the focus and the resolution is good enough for short time periods. And also to identify if any dead mollusks found in the lagoon preferred lake water, river water, or just to land. And then we'd also do, as I said, drone survey, metal detection, ground penetrator, test pits, everything around that contour line to find activity from maritime or from boats. So I'd like to say I learned a lot of lessons. It was just a startup project. Absence of evidence doesn't mean evidence of absence. And if at the end of the project, don't be dismayed, it still means something. I learned a lot. I learned don't dive when there's big thick reed beds. Don't try and even get into those. Don't dive when there's leaf fronds. Don't dive when there's autumn leaves. You won't get anywhere. Unfortunately, I'm also aware that this can produce a form of search bias for the region because you're avoiding certain objects. But however, I also learned that modern water levels are not necessarily where I should be looking. And do dive when the areas are thin. So plan your diving around the seasonal conditions. I also know that I have to develop my knowledge of how lakes form and change over time, and also the yearly and seasonal processes. It's not just about human culture, it's how human culture is defined by its environment. And then with the citizen science itself, groups like the Suomenlinna Archaeology and Seula have a lot of maritime archaeology experience. They do this NES training, which helps them. I've also been talking to local dive clubs in the past about giving them the opportunity to experience archaeology, to actually see the lakes that they're diving in a new way. And it's not just divers. Non-divers are very, very important for surface support, documentation, and of course the project, if I go ahead at Tursinokko, will be on land. Gives us an opportunity to train others in archaeological techniques and principles, gradually start small, lots of supervision. And the land phase itself can involve amateur archaeologists from the land, archaeology students, local detectorists. But we should never forget the people who actually it's land it's on. It's their own heritage and they should be allowed to be involved to answer any questions. For future projects, I've learned that site conditions can make it very hard to find and access new sites. I already picked a site which was known. So it's logical to actually, I think, initially to go back to land sites and explore their connection to water. So one future project I picked out is this Rajaraniemi Lapping Launia, which is a rock cairn. Iron Age, some graves there, built over Stone Age and early Bronze Age site. It's a fantastic area for small nooks and crannies between the little islands, possibilities that they may have been used as well. This type of site is quite common in some ways in Nazijärvi and Pyhäjärvi. They live on these peninsulas overlooking the water. Interpretations vary a great deal. It could be just a marking of territorial boundaries to other groups. It could be ritualistic. Water in the Iron Age, certainly in Britain and other countries, has been seen as a sacred space in archaeological theory or perhaps entrance to the dead, maybe even an afterlife, or perhaps even the dead just like to have a lovely view as they sit out for eternity. The project would involve exploring both the foreshore and underwater, looking for finds, wreckage, jetties, causeway constructions might be quite possible with like the rocks at hand, and looking for rock carvings, which are quite common in some areas. It would involve visual inspection, metal detecting, and probing. But if we have the right finds, we certainly have people who have the equipment we can borrow, side-scan sonar, multi-beam, sub-bottom profiling, ground penetrating radar when it ices up. And I think it's very important to actually digitalize the information as well, to use these GIS systems to overlay map data, so you can get you can interpret things in different ways. So there we have the cultural information overlaid. You have land contours. You can see there. You can have marine depth zones. You can have geology. One problem I have with this project, which I'd like someone to help perhaps steer me in the right direction, and I've been asking for months, is I don't actually have any precise idea of the lake level changes in Näsijärvi. I do in Pyhäjärvi, so I can't tell you at this site here what was the water level in the Iron Age. How do I reconstruct that past landscape? And with that thought, I'll leave you. I finished.
Thank you, David. That was a lovely overview of what is possible for a very simple diver or very simple approach with a low budget to understand or to better understand where the limitations are and where potentially there is more to find. I see that even if you don't have results, you have results. This is, I think, something to keep in mind. It's not always you have to have a sword or a cannon or something that you are successful, but you're also successful if you find that maybe you have been on the wrong place at the wrong time. And you know
Absolutely.
why.
I think the learning is very important.
Yeah, I think it's an important find. Let's see whether we have some questions. I have none.
Salamari.
Yeah, okay. There is Salamaria, please.
Yes, hello, good morning for everybody. And I have just some short comments for both speakers. And thank you very much for your presentation. Perhaps I will start with Elena. You have done really impressive work in Lithuania, and I hope that perhaps we could do also something like that in Finland in the future. And I was also very happy that you brought up the folklore as a source material. That is very important and very good. And also it's great that you have used folklore as source material, because it actually also tells us about the relationship between humans and rivers. It is more or less about the spiritual and mental relationships. Thank you very much for that. And then David, thank you also very much for your presentation. I learned really much about Näsijärvi and Pyhäjärvi, and also about Tursiannotko. And it was also very good that you brought up the idea of seamless maritime and terrestrial landscape. That is very important, that we understand that they are connected to each other. And also I hope that in the future maritime archaeologists and land archaeologists could work more together at the same spot. So thank you very much for your presentations.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that I actually, because there are not many jobs in maritime archaeology, I actually work most of the time at land archaeology. So it gives me both perspectives, and it's quite easy sometimes to get a little pigeonholed in one environment or the other. So I get to see both sides of the coin, which are just one coin.
Yeah, that is indeed true. And I found it also very interesting and important to keep in mind that the water levels do change over time. And the geological aspect of that is that we have this land rise in Finland, where constantly actually the land is coming out of the sea, and potential sites, as you found out here also in this case, they really move. And I have one example that I have seen, that is snapper tuna in the in Tamisaari area, which is now basically on dry land, and there's a small river close by. And this has been in the archipelago before, it was an island, so 500 years ago. So that demonstrates a little bit what is happening, and that the marine archaeologists indeed can look a little bit on the land. And you see it actually also in the Hyllit net, that there are some wrecks located on land.
Yeah, I was in contrast to what Elena was talking about, these ravine sites, the steep sides, and they actually get quite clear water here. Finland is certainly much more flat. I think it's known for having the most outlets of water flowing than many other countries in the world. So you think of it like that game where the ball sits in the little slots and it tilts, the water starts flowing this way, that way, and it fills into any shallow kind of air it drops into. We have very different kind of issues here, I think, than perhaps in those sort of sites you have in Lithuania.
Yeah, that is true. There is this aspect of the land rise is not equal everywhere. I know that in Vasa area, or a little bit up, it's 1 centimeter per year, and if you go here in Helsinki, it's less. It's 8 millimeters or something like that, or less. Yeah. Do we have more questions, more comments? Anything coming?
I'm thinking in the chat.
Yeah.
Can I just apologize? At one point I stopped. I heard someone talking. I wasn't sure if someone was giving a comment. So I was like, someone talking to me? I get sort of paranoid, you know, hearing voices in my head.
Unfortunately, there was some microphone accidentally open, I think.
Yeah.
But we got over it, and thanks for that, and thanks for your presentation. And let's keep talking about these future projects, because I would be interested to join there and collaborate. And
I wouldn't be able to pay expenses, but I've been offering people 12 cans of beer for their journey time.
That's something. Also, we have already one sponsor, but we can try. I would really give an effort and try to get more sponsorship, also to have appropriate equipment available, as you said, and maybe rent something also, that these things can be done in a bit more comprehensive way. I don't dare to say professional way, because that is confusing, as professionals are paid people, not volunteers, and they can do equally good work, I believe. And I think this shows it, that volunteers are important in the overall research arenas, because they do help and support the spearhead of the scientist.
And I think the community is very important as well, involving the community, not just the divers, not just them, but the local people whose land it is. Particularly now we have the change in the law that, you know, to do research, you need to get the permission of the landowner, and even in the waters. It's becoming increasingly important in Finland to heads up the local people.
Yeah, I think it is. It's really important, especially. I mean, if you let's say are digging or swimming or looking at something in front of the house in the water, of course people are wondering, are interested, and very often you have to ask anyway to get access to the water. It's in archaeology not any different than it is in ecological research, what Metsähallitus does. And I was there last year with participating for a couple of months. We really had very good contacts to the local landowners, and there I learned actually from one person who was saying 50 years ago, he was pointing out that this rock there out 50 years ago was not, it was underwater. So you could really directly get a feeling from a person who has seen that land rise happening actually, and the water retreating. Yeah, so it is. I think it's very important because we not only the respect to the people, it is also to get the information from the people. Where was the shoreline exactly? So it helps us to find the proper spot where to look for the things which are important for our research, right? Or for you as here, you're the expert.